Egypt is the oldest country on Earth that still exists. It has been a single, recognizable civilization for over 5,000 years. No other nation comes close. But here's what's strange. When Cleopatra was born, the pyramids of Giza were already 2,500 years old. She lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the people who built the pyramids she walked past every day. Think about that for a second. The pyramids were ancient ruins to the ancient Egyptians. That's the kind of history Egypt has, and this is just the beginning. The Hyksos conquered it, the Assyrians conquered it, the Persians conquered it, the Greeks conquered it, the Romans conquered it, the Arabs conquered it, the Ottomans conquered it, Napoleon conquered it, the British conquered it. Every single one of them is gone. Egypt is still here. Egypt's greatest weapon was never its army. It was something no empire ever figured out how to fight. Let's start at the very beginning. About 5,100 years ago, there was no Egypt. There were two countries. Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile cuts through the desert, and Lower Egypt up north, where the river fans out into the Mediterranean. They had different kings, different gods, different crowns, and they did not like each other. Then around 3100 BC, a king from the south named Nama decided to fix that permanently. He marched north with an army and beat the lower Egyptian king into submission. Then he did something genuinely brilliant. Instead of destroying the losing side, he combined the two crowns into one and put them both on his own head. The red crown of Lower Egypt nested inside the white crown of Upper Egypt. One king, one country, one calendar built around the flooding of the Nile. Sir, the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom hate each other. Solved. How? I'm wearing both their hats now. That's not how that works. It is now. By the way, write that down. Write what down? Everything. Forever. Start tomorrow. And that is exactly what happened. Nama's scribes started keeping records. Harvest totals, tax receipts, the height of the Nile flood every single year. They invented a writing system called hieroglyphs and a class of professional record keepers to use it. A young temple scribe named Yosef would sit cross-legged with a reed pen, logging grain into clay jars stamped with the king's seal. That bureaucracy, he was part of, would outlast the Roman Empire by 1,000 years. Nama's kingdom became something the world had genuinely never seen before. A unified state stretching nearly 700 miles along a single river. And almost immediately, his successors started building things that should not have been possible for the technology of the time. About 400 years after Nama, a king named Djoser hired an architect named Imhotep, and together they built the first pyramid in human history. It was a step pyramid at Saqqara, 6 stone layers stacked on top of each other like a giant staircase climbing into the sky. Before this, every building on Earth was made of mud, brick, or wood. Imhotep looked at the desert and said, "What if we use stone forever?" The Egyptians were so impressed, they eventually made him a god. An architect became a deity because his building did not fall down. That tells you everything about how this civilization thought. Then about a century later came the absolute peak of the madness. A king named Khufu decided his pyramid would not be a staircase. It would be a perfect, smooth-sided mountain. He picked a spot called Giza on the west bank of the Nile and put 20,000 workers on it for about 20 years. They moved 2.3 million stone blocks, each one weighing as much as a small car. The finished pyramid was 481 feet tall. It would remain the tallest man-made structure on Earth for the next 3,800 years. So the workers are asking how many more stones. All of them. They asked how many that is. All of them. Sir, one stone alone weighs more than a chariot. Then move it carefully. Here's the part nobody tells you. The pyramid builders were not slaves. Archaeologists have found their villages, their bakeries, their medical records, and even their tombs. They were paid workers, fed on bread and beer and onions, and they were proud of the job. Skeletons of pyramid workers show healed broken bones, meaning when a man was hurt, the state took care of him until he could work again. That was the deal. Build the king's mountain, and Egypt takes care of you. Khufu's son and grandson built the two smaller pyramids next to his, plus a giant lion-bodied statue with a human face called the Sphinx. And then almost as suddenly as the pyramid age began, it stopped. The kings that came after looked at the cost and quietly decided to build smaller tombs. The age of giants was over, but Egypt was just getting started. For the next 500 years, Egypt rolled along peacefully. Kings came and went. The Nile flooded every summer, deposited rich black silt across the fields, and the harvest came in. Scribes counted the grain. Priests ran the temples. Farmers paid their taxes in wheat. The system was so stable that it almost ran itself. Then around 2200 BC, something genuinely strange happened. The Nile stopped flooding properly. We know this now from sediment cores and tree rings. A massive climate shift had hit the entire region. Rainfall collapsed across North Africa. The Nile floods, which depended on summer monsoons in Ethiopia thousands of miles upstream, became weak and unpredictable. For year after year after year, the river simply did not deliver. The harvests failed. The grain stores emptied. People started eating their own children, according to a horrified text written by a survivor. The central government in the capital lost control. Local governors out in the provinces stopped sending taxes north and started running their districts like private kingdoms. Egypt fractured into dozens of warring pieces. Historians call this period the First Intermediate Period, which is the politest possible way of saying everything fell apart. It lasted about 140 years. Sir, the harvest failed again. Send to the king for help. Sir, the king has no food either. Then who is in charge? Nobody is in charge. That is the problem. And then something quietly extraordinary happened. A family of governors down in the southern city of Thebes started rebuilding. Slowly, patiently, generation by generation, they pulled the pieces back together. Around 2050 BC, a king named Mentuhotep II finally marched north and reunited the country by force. Egypt was whole again. The scribes started keeping records again. The priests reopened the temples. The Nile, by some lucky coincidence, started behaving itself again. What followed is called the Middle Kingdom, and it was Egypt's golden age of literature. This is when most of the great Egyptian stories were actually written down. Tales of shipwrecked sailors meeting giant snake gods, peasants delivering brilliant speeches about justice, kings worrying about their legacies. The Middle Kingdom Egyptians looked back at the pyramid builders the same way we look at them, as legendary ancestors from a vanished golden age. But the Middle Kingdom had a weakness the Pyramid Age never did. Egypt had grown rich again, and out in the deserts to the east, people were watching. Hungry people, well-armed people, people with a piece of technology Egypt had never seen before, and they were about to walk straight in through the front door. Around 1650 BC, a people called the Hyksos came down from the eastern deserts and the lands beyond Sinai. The name basically means rulers from foreign lands. The Egyptians had been farming with wooden tools and fighting with copper-tipped spears for over 1,000 years. The Hyksos showed up with bronze weapons, composite bows that shot twice as far as Egyptian bows, and a piece of technology that broke the Egyptian army completely: the horse-drawn chariot. Egypt had never seen a horse before. Imagine being an Egyptian foot soldier standing in a wheat field, and suddenly two men come thundering at you on a wooden platform pulled by an animal you have no word for, one driving and one shooting arrows at full gallop. You would run too. The Hyksos took the entire Nile Delta and made their capital at a city called Avaris. For about 100 years, foreigners ruled Egypt for the very first time. Sir, the foreigners have these animals. What kind of animals? Big ones. They run very fast, and they pull boxes with men in them. Sir, our spearmen cannot catch the boxes, then throw the spears harder. They tried, sir. The boxes are too fast. Here's the part that became the Egyptian pattern for the next 3,000 years. The Hyksos did not destroy Egyptian civilization. They moved into it. They started writing in hieroglyphs. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own. They put on Egyptian clothes and Egyptian crowns and called themselves pharaohs. Within 2 generations, you almost could not tell them apart from native Egyptians. This would happen again and again with every single conqueror Egypt ever had. The civilization absorbed its invaders like the Nile absorbed the desert sand. But down in Thebes, the old southern capital, the native Egyptian princes were quietly furious. They had spent a century watching foreigners sit on their throne. Around 1550 BC, a king named Ahmose I gathered an army, copied the Hyksos chariot technology, learned to shoot the composite bow, and marched north. He chased the Hyksos all the way back to Avaris and then kept going, hunting them across Sinai into Canaan. He wanted to make sure they never came back. When Ahmose came home, Egypt was unified, militarized, and angry. The peaceful river kingdom of the pyramid builders was gone. In its place stood a new Egypt with a professional standing army, a chariot corps, and a brand new attitude toward the outside world. If we do not conquer them, they will conquer us. The new kingdom had begun, and it was about to produce the most famous pharaohs in history. The new kingdom was Egypt's age of empire. For the first time in its history, Egyptian armies marched out of the Nile Valley and conquered territory abroad. Pharaoh Thutmose III, sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, fought 17 campaigns in 20 years and pushed Egyptian control all the way to the Euphrates River in modern Syria. Look at this map. See this stretch of land from Sudan in the south all the way up the Mediterranean coast into what is now Lebanon and Syria. That was Egypt at its largest. Tribute flowed in from every direction. Gold from Nubia, cedar wood from Lebanon, horses from Anatolia, slaves from everywhere. Egypt got so rich that the priests of the god Ammon in the temple at Karnak became the second most powerful people in the country, sometimes the first. The temples owned vast estates, thousands of workers, and entire fleets of ships. They were basically a state within a state. And around 1350 BC, one pharaoh decided to do something about it. His name was Amenhotep IV, and he had a genuinely revolutionary idea. He looked at the dozens of gods Egyptians had worshipped for over 1,500 years, and he said, "What if there was only one?" He picked the sun disk, called Aten, and declared it the only god in the universe. He changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning useful to Aten. He shut down the old temples, fired the priests, and built a brand new capital in the middle of nowhere called Amarna. Sir, the people are confused. About what? About which god to pray to. There is one. There used to be hundreds. Now there is one. Try to keep up. So the priests of Ammon are furious. The priests of Ammon no longer exist. Tell them that. They will not like it. Correct. This was the first attempt at monotheism in recorded human history, 1,000 years before Judaism really crystallized, and it failed spectacularly. Akhenaten was so obsessed with his religious revolution that he ignored Egypt's empire abroad. Diplomatic letters from desperate allies in Canaan begging for military help piled up unanswered. When Akhenaten died, Egypt had lost most of its foreign territory. His son was a sickly 9-year-old boy named Tutankhaten. The priests immediately renamed him Tutankhamun, dragged him back to the old religion, abandoned Amarna, and tried to pretend the whole monotheism experiment had never happened. Tutankhamun died at 19, almost certainly from a combination of malaria and a broken leg. He was buried in a small, hastily prepared tomb that history would forget about for 3,200 years. After Tutankhamun's brief reign came the pharaoh most people picture when they hear the word pharaoh. His name was Ramesses II, and he ruled Egypt for 66 years. He fathered somewhere around 100 children. He built more temples, statues, and monuments than any other pharaoh in Egyptian history. If you walk through any major museum today and see a giant stone pharaoh staring down at you, there is a very good chance it is Ramesses. Early in his reign, he fought the most famous battle in ancient Egyptian history at a place called Kadesh in modern Syria. He marched out with about 20,000 men against the Hittite Empire, the other military superpower of the age. He walked straight into a trap. The Hittites had hidden their entire chariot force behind a hill, and when Ramesses' army was strung out on the march, they charged. Most of the Egyptian army broke and ran. Ramesses himself was nearly killed. He fought his way out personally, rallied the survivors, and managed to drag the battle to a stalemate by nightfall. When he got home, he carved the story onto every temple wall he could find. According to his version, he had single-handedly defeated the entire Hittite army while his cowardly soldiers watched. The Hittites carved their own version of the battle on their own walls back in Anatolia, and they claimed they had won. Both versions still exist. It is the first battle in human history we have written records of from both sides, and they completely disagree. Sir, what really happened at Kadesh? We won, obviously. Sir, the Hittites are still on their throne. Details. Sir, we lost the territory. Detail. Carve the wall again. Make me bigger this time. About 15 years later, Ramesses and the Hittite king signed the world's first known peace treaty. Both copies still survive. one in Egyptian hieroglyphs and one in Hittite cuneiform. A copy hangs in the United Nations building in New York today. The world's first international peace agreement was negotiated by a man who refused to admit he had ever lost a battle. Rameses lived so long that he outlived 12 of his own crown princes. When he finally died around age 90, his 13th son took the throne as an old man himself. After Rameses, the new kingdom began to slowly fade. Foreign raiders from the Mediterranean called the Sea Peoples attacked the coast. The empire shrank. The priests of Ammon in Thebes effectively split the country in two. By 1070 BC, the age of the great pharaohs was over. Egypt's long, slow decline had begun. For the next 700 years, Egypt was conquered over and over again. First came the Libyans from the western deserts. They took the throne and ruled for about 2 centuries, calling themselves pharaohs and worshipping the Egyptian gods. Then came the Cushites from Nubia in the south, dark-skinned kings from modern Sudan who marched north and reunited Egypt under their own dynasty. They were the most enthusiastically Egyptian rulers Egypt had seen in centuries, building pyramids in Nubia and reviving old religious traditions the native Egyptians had half forgotten. Then in 671 BC, the Assyrians arrived. The Assyrians were the most terrifying military empire the ancient world had ever produced. They came out of northern Iraq with iron weapons, siege engines, and a strategy of deliberate, calculated cruelty. They sacked the city of Thebes, dragged its treasures back to Nineveh, and left Egypt as a puppet state. About a century later came the Persians under King Cambyses, who walked into Egypt with the largest army anyone had ever seen and added it to his empire like a man adding a province to his estate. Sir, who is in charge of Egypt now? The Persians. Last week it was the Assyrians. Last century it was the Cushites. Before that the Libyans. Are we still Egypt? We are always Egypt. The faces change. The river does not. This is the secret of Egyptian survival. The conquerors kept coming. The conquerors kept winning. And the conquerors kept turning Egyptian. The Persian governors learned to read hieroglyphs. They made offerings to Egyptian gods. They got buried in Egyptian-style tombs. The river, the calendar, the writing, the religion, the food, the architecture, all of it just absorbed each new wave of rulers like the floodwaters absorbing a stone. Then in 332 BC, a 24-year-old Macedonian general arrived at the edge of the Nile Delta. His name was Alexander the Great. He had just smashed the Persian Empire that ruled Egypt, and the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator. He marched south to the oracle of Ammon in the western desert, and the priests there declared him the son of the god. Alexander accepted with a straight face. He founded a brand new city on the Mediterranean coast and named it after himself, Alexandria. Then he marched east to conquer the rest of the known world and died 8 years later at age 32, leaving his enormous empire with no clear heir. His generals carved it up between themselves. Egypt went to a Macedonian officer named Ptolemy, who became the first king of a foreign dynasty that would rule Egypt for the next 300 years. The Ptolemies were Greek, but they played the Egyptian game perfectly. They dressed in pharaoh's robes for ceremonies and in Greek tunics at home. They built temples to Egyptian gods in pure Egyptian style while speaking Greek with their courtiers. They married their own sisters in the Egyptian royal tradition, which was genuinely strange for Greeks, but completely normal for pharaohs. For 3 centuries, they ran Egypt as the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean world. Their capital, Alexandria, became the greatest city on earth. It had a lighthouse 350 feet tall, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It had the largest library ever assembled, with hundreds of thousands of scrolls collected from every corner of the known world. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to study there. A man named Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth from inside that library and got the answer right to within about 200 miles. In 240 BC. Then in 69 BC, the last great Ptolemy was born. Her name was Cleopatra VII, and here is the part that will rearrange your brain. The pyramids of Giza were already 2,500 years old when she was born. She lived closer in time to the moon landing in 1969 than to the men who built the pyramids she could see from her palace window. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were ancient ruins from a civilization so old it felt almost mythical, the same way we feel about her. Cleopatra was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages. She was the first Ptolemy in 300 years to actually learn Egyptian. She studied mathematics, philosophy, and medicine, and she inherited a kingdom that was about to be swallowed by the new superpower of the Mediterranean, Rome. So she did the only thing that might save Egypt. She made herself indispensable to the most powerful Romans alive. First Julius Caesar, with whom she had a son. Then after Caesar was assassinated, Mark Antony, with whom she had 3 more children. She kept Egypt independent for 20 years through sheer political skill and personal nerve. Then in 31 BC, she and Antony lost the naval battle of Actium against Caesar's heir Octavian. A year later, with Roman soldiers entering her palace, Cleopatra killed herself rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. She was the last pharaoh. After her, Octavian made Egypt a personal province of the Roman emperor. For the first time in over 3,000 years, no one wore the double crown. The institution Nama had invented at the dawn of history was finally extinguished. But Egypt itself, Egypt was still Egypt. Rome ruled Egypt for nearly 700 years, and Egypt did what Egypt always did. It absorbed the conquerors. Roman governors learned Egyptian customs. Roman soldiers married Egyptian women. The grain fleets sailed from Alexandria every summer to feed the city of Rome itself. Without Egyptian wheat, Rome would have starved. The Romans knew it, and they ruled Egypt with unusual care. Then in the 1st century AD, a new religion arrived. According to tradition, the Apostle Mark walked into Alexandria around 60 AD and started preaching. Within 300 years, most of Egypt was Christian. The old gods, worshipped on the Nile for 3,000 years, faded into silence one temple at a time. The hieroglyphs stopped being written. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 AD on a temple wall at Philae, and after that the knowledge of how to read them was simply lost. For the next 1,400 years, nobody on earth could read what the pharaohs had written. In medieval Cairo, a Christian weaver's daughter named Maria would pray every Sunday in a church built directly on top of a temple to a goddess no one in her city remembered. The stones of the old religion had become the foundations of the new one. That was Egypt. Then in 641 AD, an Arab general named Amr ibn Alaz arrived from the deserts to the east with an army carrying a brand new religion called Islam. He took Egypt from the Romans in about 2 years. The Arabs founded a new capital called Fustat, which would eventually grow into Cairo. Over the next several centuries, Egypt slowly became a Muslim country and an Arabic-speaking one. But the pattern held. The Arabs became Egyptian. They built mosques where temples had stood, they farmed the same fields the pharaohs had farmed, and they measured their year by the same Nile flood. Then in 1250 came the strangest rulers Egypt ever had. The Mamluks were slave soldiers, boys bought as children from the steppes of Central Asia, raised in barracks, trained as elite cavalry, and then freed to serve as the ruling military caste. They overthrew their own masters and took the throne. For 267 years, Egypt was ruled by a self-replacing dynasty of former slaves who recruited the next generation of rulers the same way they themselves had been recruited. They stopped the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, the only army in the world that ever defeated the Mongols in open battle. Then in 1517, the Ottoman Turks arrived, and Egypt got a new master once again. The Ottomans ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, mostly as a distant province, sending tax money back to Istanbul. Then, in 1798, a 28-year-old French general named Napoleon Bonaparte landed at Alexandria with 38,000 troops and 167 scientists. He had read his ancient history. He wanted to be the new Alexander. He beat the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids, but the British Navy under Nelson destroyed his fleet a few weeks later, and Napoleon eventually slipped away home, abandoning his army. But his scientists changed history. They mapped every monument, drew every temple, and on a fortified wall in the Delta, they found a black stone covered in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic Egyptian, and hieroglyphs, the Rosetta Stone. 20 years later, a young Frenchman named Jean-Francois Champollion used it to crack the hieroglyphic code. After 1,400 years of silence, the pharaohs could speak again. After the French left, an Albanian officer named Mohammed Ali seized power and ran Egypt as a personal kingdom for 40 years. His descendants ruled until 1882, when the British walked in to protect their investment in the new Suez Canal and never quite left. For another 70 years, Egypt was a kingdom on paper and a British protectorate in practice. Then, on the night of July 23, 1952, a group of young army officers led by a colonel named Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrew the king and seized the country. For the first time since Cleopatra died in 30 BC, an Egyptian was the ruler of Egypt. 2,300 unbroken years of foreign rulers ended in a single night. Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, defied Britain, France, and Israel in the 1956 crisis, and became the most popular leader in the Arab world. After Nasser came Anwar Sadat, who made peace with Israel in 1978 and was assassinated for it 3 years later. Then Hosni Mubarak, who ruled for 30 years until the 2011 revolution swept him out. Then a brief Muslim Brotherhood government, then another military coup, and today Egypt is led by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. And in modern Cairo, a university student named Sophia walks past hieroglyphs carved into stone 5,000 years before she was born. She lives in a country that has buried every empire that tried to bury it. The Pharaohs, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, the French, the British, all gone. Egypt is still here. Egypt was here first, and somehow Egypt is always here last. And that is Egypt.